Hello, my name is Mark Schneider. Today we're going to go over the basic building process of putting together a mini theater booth. Now your booth might be a little different, might be a little wider, might be a little deeper, but the concept's the same. You're going to have 4 walls, a hardwood ceiling, and a bench seat. Now we're going to go through every process from measuring out the floor to nailing the final trim on. So alright, let's get started. So the first thing I recommend with building any booth job is to measure out the room one more time. You want to confirm the measurements on your floor plan with the actual store. The last thing you want to do is build 9 booths in a row, get to the last one and realize you're about 3 inches short. So once you've confirmed all the measurements, what we want to do is we want to measure out the floor and put marks on the floor where the booths are going to end up in their final location. The last thing you want to do is build the booths, get them all up, and then realize you have to shuffle them over 2 or 3 inches. The booths together weigh about 300-400 pounds and they're almost impossible to move once they're in place. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to measure out on the floor the exact location where we want the end of the booth to be and just put some marks on the floor so we can finalize the booth in its final resting place. So according to the floor plan, I need to be out 5 foot 9 inches from the back wall, meaning the front of my booth will be 5 foot 9 inches from the back wall. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to mark it at 5 foot 8 inches because my door frame is 1 inch thick and I want to make sure I line up my floor first because the door goes on later. So I'm just going to put a mark here at 5 foot 8 inches and I'm going to do this periodically through the entire row of booths. So our standard mini theater has basically 2 options for the touch panel, meaning it can either be mounted into a bench seat or it can be mounted into the armrest. This booth we're going to do both scenarios just so you have a good idea of how it works. For the bench seat, it is required that you put the cabling underneath the flooring. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to flip the floor on its back and we're going to just take out all the screws holding this little channel on here. Now that we have the cover plate removed, we want to run the wire through the floor. Now keep in mind this cable has been tested. We do want to make sure that it is protected. We don't want to crimp it into the troughs. We don't want to drive a screw through it. So we want to take a little extra care with this because obviously once it's run through the floor and the booth is built on top of it, if you have a problem, it's going to be very difficult to replace. The side with the hole, we want to go ahead and just push the cable through. And I would say give yourself to the length of the floor in extra cable there. So once it's laid across there, we're just going to lay this cable in the trough and then we're going to put the cover plate back on. Again, like I said, just take extra care to make sure you're not pushing the cable into a corner and crimping it in any way. Once you get the last screw in, you just want to make sure the cable is sliding through the trough easily, so just kind of give it a little bit of a tug in both directions. Make sure it's not bound up or anything. Once the cable is secured, we're ready to go ahead and lay the floor on the ground. What we want to start with is the seat side wall and the seat back wall. Now each panel is labeled on the side. It'll tell you which one's which. With the seat side wall, it is important that we drill the hole for the armrest wire ahead of time. Just like we did the cable through the floor, if you're doing an armrest, you want to make sure that the hole is drilled through the wall and then we run the wire before we build the booth, just in case you're pushing against a wall and you're not going to be able to access that later. Now, the height of the armrest is somewhat of a personal preference. We have a set height that we like to use, but you can do any height you want. What we basically need to do is just drill a hole through the wall, and we're going to run the wire ahead of time, so when we put the booth together, we can add the armrest later. So the standard height we like to use is 23.5 inches off the ground. So I'm just going to measure 23.5 off the ground, put a little mark there, and then we're going to measure 10 inches in. And so that's our general area where we're just going to drill a hole, and this is going to be for our wire on our armrest. You can pretty much use any size you want, but all we're going to do is push a phone cord through it. So I recommend a 3/4 or 1 inch paddle bit. Just put it on your mark and drill right through the wall. Once you drill through the wall, I recommend that you sweep up the floor so the panel will lay flat on the floor. So now that we have the hole drilled, we're just going to go ahead and push the wire through. And this side of the cable only needs to be about 8 inches long, so I'm just going to feed the whole wire through. And then the 8 inches that's hanging out extra, I'm going to just go ahead and put some tape on it. Now we're going to go ahead and start putting the panels together. When you use the carriage bolts to hold these corner steels on, you want to decide the proper length. We only use 3/4 inch and 1 inch panels. So if we're using a 3/4 inch panel and we have an 1/8 inch piece of steel, we're going to want to use a 1 inch carriage bolt and put a cap nut on the inside. Now whenever you're building these type of booths, you really want to pay attention to which walls the booth is going to slide up against. So since we're going to slide this panel up against this wall, obviously we can't tighten the nut from the backside once it's done. So we're going to want to push the nut through towards us, and then we're going to be able to tighten it later. So right now all I'm going to do is I'm going to put this corner steel on here, and I'm going to use some 1 inch carriage bolts. I'm going to just push them through the hole and then put a cap nut on top. So once you put bolts and nuts on the entire piece of steel, we can go ahead and do the same thing on this side. Same scenario, we're using a 1 inch bolt, piece of corner steel, and then the cap nut. Now we're going to add the seat side panel, and this is one of the few things that you need a helper with. And my assistant Ray here, he's going to slide the panel over in the corner. And once we get it lined up, we're going to pull this next panel right next to it. And again, with this situation, we're going to pretend that we're going against a wall, so we're going to put the bolts facing inward. And again, he's going to use a 1 inch carriage bolt, and we're just going to put a cap nut on it. Once you have the panels together, you want to make sure the floor is flush with the panel. So we make sure it's brought in all the way, and then we're also going to make sure that this panel is flush with the floor. And once we have that, we're just going to drive 1 3/4 inch screw directly through the foot into the floor. And we're going to do that on the other side also. Keep in mind that your booth may not have floors, so everything's going to go together the same, except your steel is just going to be a little lower, and your steel will actually be on the floor of your store. And you don't want to screw it into the concrete yet. You can do that later if you desire. The next panel we're going to put on is the monitor panel, and to secure that one, we're going to use another piece of corner steel. We're going to follow the same process. We're just going to put it in this corner here, and since this panel is going to go up against a wall, again, we're going to use a 1 inch bolt with a regular cap nut. So once you get the steel on, we want to do the same thing. Make sure the floor is lined up with the steel. We're going to use a 3/4 inch sheet metal screw and just drive it to the floor. So now you want to get an assistant, and you're just going to bring the panel over to the corner steel. Keep in mind that if you do have the cable going through the floor, you want to make sure the notch in the panel lines up evenly with the cable so you're not damaging it. And all you're going to do on this one is, since we have access behind the panel, we're going to use a 1.5 inch bolt, and we're just going to push that through to the back. And whenever you're pushing a panel or a bolt through to the back, you're going to use a washer and a regular hex nut on the back since there's no corner steel there. So we're just going to go down the row here and put the rest of the bolts in. So now we're going to need to put another piece of corner steel on this panel here, but since we're adding a filler panel or when we're adding another booth, we need to put booth steel on both sides. So I'm actually going to use 2 pieces of steel. I'm going to use one on the inside, and since we have the 1 inch panel and we're using 2 pieces of steel, I'm going to use a 1.5 inch carriage bolt. So I'm just going to push that through the panel here, and then I'm going to use another piece of booth steel. We're just going to lay that on the opposite side, and then I just use a regular hex nut. There's no need for a washer since we have a piece of steel. And then I'm just going to go ahead and fasten the rest of the steel all the way down. Since we have easy access to the front and back of this panel right now, I'm going to go ahead and install the bill acceptor. This makes it a little easier. What we want to do is just remove the extra cable that's hanging on the bill acceptor. So all you have is this little door here. And this is just going to slide right through. And you're going to use these carriage bolts. They're going to slide right through the hole here. We're going to use a small washer and a small nut. They should have come in the same package together. And we're just going to loosely tighten them on the back. In the example, we used a hinge door for your bill acceptor, but there are various other models. This is one of them. This is just a solid bill plate. Obviously, there's no access from inside the booth. You would mount this in the panel, and then you would have a access panel from the hallway. This basically works the same way. You would just slide it through the pre-drilled holes, and you're going to go ahead and just use a washer and a regular nut to secure it to the panel. But basically, the concept's the same. So the monitor panel comes pre-installed with the window frame, and it has some square drive screws on it. This is to slow somebody down in case they want to pull this whole thing off to get to your money. But what we like to do also is put some carriage bolts in the four corners. That way there's no way they're going to be able to get into that. We cannot ship the bolts already pre-installed because they stick out the back too far. So what we need to do now is we're just going to drill out 4 holes in these upper corner, this lower one here, and same on the other side. You can use a 1/4 inch drill bit, and you're just going to go right through the metal and right through the panel. So once you have the holes drilled out, you're going to use the same carriage bolt that you used on the bill acceptor. Just going to push it through the panel. You're going to use a small washer and a small nut. Just put it on, tighten it up, cinch it down, and do the same on all 4. Next, we need to install the speaker. It's basically just 4 screws. The type of speaker we sent you might vary a little bit. You can use standard Phillips screws if you like. We do recommend using either a square drive or some other type of screw, which makes it a little more difficult for the people to pull it off. We don't recommend using one-way screws because eventually you do have to take this off and swap it out. So basically just line up your speaker in the hole here and then screw it in. Now again, since we have easy access to the back of the booth, right now is a good time to go ahead and tighten up all these different carriage bolts. If you have a nut driver, these work really well. It's a 3/8 nut driver. Just tighten them up. Obviously, if you don't have one, you can use a crescent wrench or whatever you like. Just go ahead and tighten them all up and make them all secure. Next, we're going to install the alarm blocks. There's 2 of them. One is going to go for the window frame, and the other one goes up to this bill acceptor door. The block with the 2 sets of wires goes down on the bottom, and the single wire goes up top. What we're going to do is we're going to use just 2 2-inch screws, slide them through the block here, and you're going to rest it right on the top corner of this bill acceptor door. We want to make sure the plunger is touching the front of the actual door itself. And then once you push the block in, it will engage the plunger. And once you have it nice and firm, just drill it into the wall. So now the lower block is going to mount to the bottom part of this window frame. It's very important to get this lower portion away from the glass and definitely around this frame here. Again, we're just going to use 2-inch screws. We want to line it up, make sure it's nice and tight, and then we're just going to go ahead and screw it right to the panel. So now we need to go ahead and wire the back. If you do have a bill acceptor door like this, we want to open it so we know the total length of wire needed before we zip tie anything. So just go ahead and open the bill door, let it swing open, and just let it lay there. Next, we need to connect a few wires to the back of the booth. Your specific configuration might be a little different, but they're all basically going to hook up the same. The connectors might be a little different, but essentially they're all going to connect to the same spots. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to connect the bill acceptor. This is a standard, what we call a Mars harness. And there's only one way this connects on here, and it just kind of snaps in place. The other piece for this application is what we call a 36 pin, and these are our bill trigger points, and these are going to connect to the Mars harness. So here we're just going to slip these 2 in together. Make sure they're pressed in all the way so you don't see any exposed metal. Get them in there nice and tight. Now the extra wire we have on here is for the speaker, and there's no polarity, meaning it doesn't matter which side is hooked up to what. Sometimes the connectors on the back of the speaker will dictate it. One will be smaller, one will be bigger. But basically, you're just going to hook up the terminals to the back of the speaker, and then you have everything connected. Now we just need to tie everything up. So now once we have everything connected, we want to kind of just zip tie and staple the wires so they're out of the way. Obviously, you don't want them dangling in front of the TV and everything, and since we have easy access, this is a great time to do it. With the speaker here, I recommend you give yourself a little bit of slack. to where when you pull the speaker out from the front, you can still access the wires. But basically just kind of tie it up as best you can. As for the bill acceptor wire, we definitely want to give ourselves a little bit of a strain relief. What I mean by that is when we tie this up, we want to keep it to where the bill acceptor can open and close freely without this wire getting caught up. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of bundle all 4 of these wires up here like this, and then I'm going to use a wire tie, just because I know the staples over time, sometimes they fall out. Just use a nice strong wire tie there, and we're just going to screw it right to the wall. Because the seat base is the exact width of the booth, we do need to put the seat base in before we put the door on, because the door has a door jamb and you won't be able to slide the seat base back unless you decide to go over the top of the booth, which is a little difficult. So first thing we're going to do is you're going to lay it down here in the back of the booth. If your booth has the configuration with the wire in the floor, again, you just want to be careful not to pinch it or crimp it. You're not going to slide it all the way back because you want to have some access to tighten the bolts, but right here is a pretty good location. That way the door jamb will kind of line up right there and keep everything out of the way. So right now we're ready to do the door frame. One tricky thing about these door frames is they are very delicate until you actually mount them to the booth. When you're ready to install these, especially the larger booths, they're very heavy, and there's a very small bit of wood here that's holding everything together. When you lay the door down, you always want to make sure that the hinge is on the top. This way the door will stay together better and the door won't accidentally flop open once we're taking the foot off. So now once one of your people are holding the door still, the other person can remove the foot. And again, you just want to take your time with this. You don't need to rush it. These doors are very difficult to replace if you crack one. So once you get the cleat off the bottom, you want to take extra care when handling the door. When you tilt it up, obviously you don't want to lift one side of it and not the other, otherwise it's going to split. One thing to keep in mind also is when you pick the door for each booth, keep in mind that they all may look the same, but each door is cut independently for that specific booth. Some booths are an end booth, so the wood is a little longer on this side. Some booths are middle booths to where the wood is farther in. So make sure you look at the side of the door. It will tell you which booth they go to. So once you have the foot off, we're just going to go ahead and tilt this up. Again, you just want to take your time. You want to lean it up nice and slow. Now, one of the key things that you have to keep in mind when you're moving a door is the best way to do it is for one person to actually grasp the door, squeeze it in together, and then lift it. The reason behind this is if you try to slide it and you're sliding the door and the back part of the door gets caught on the floor, it will make a Y and it'll split the door and it'll be cracked. So best way to do this, one person, grab both sides and just carry it over to the booth. So now you have to have somebody go on the inside of the booth. Ray's going to go inside now. And I'm just going to slide this up, line it up to the edge of the booth, push it in the corner. And now I'm going to go ahead and feed 1 1/4 inch bolts through the wood, through the steel, and Ray's going to put some cap nuts on the other side. So once the door's in place, the guy on the outside is responsible for holding the door up because the person on the inside can't do anything from keeping it from falling this way. Now you're just going to use your 1 1/4 inch bolts and you're going to go through the steel. If you have any problems lining it up, we like to use a screwdriver. You can just kind of wedge that in the panel to kind of keep it straight, and then just put your bolts in, and the guy on the inside is just going to put cap nuts on the end of them. You're going to do this top to bottom on both sides. So since we don't have a doorknob on there, we have to get our assistant out, and basically there's just a small little latch you'll see in there. You can use a flathead or Phillips. You just kind of pop the little latch out and it comes right out. The area behind the panel is where the TVs are going to go, and we need to make a shelf for it. The way this works is there's a cleat on the front of the panel, and then we have this shelf support on the back. So to line up the cleat, all I'm going to do is take the shelf support, and I'm going to lay it against the panel here, just get as close as I can. Then I'm just going to draw a line, and that tells me where the top of the cleat should be. So once that's drawn, we just get this out of the way. And now we're going to mount the cleat. For this, you can use 2-inch screws. You just want to be a little careful as to how far you drive the screw through the panel, because obviously you don't want to go into the booth. Anytime you're screwing a 2x2 or 2x4 to one of these panels, I recommend drilling it all the way into the panel, backing it out about a 1/2 inch, and then driving it in again to make sure it's flush. But again, you don't want to go very deep because you don't want to break through the front of the panel. So now we're going to put a filler panel on that's going to cover the TV area. And what we do between any time we have front panels, whether door, filler, whatever, we put a piece of T-steel. You can see the T-steel has a countersunk groove on one side and it's flush on the other. We're going to be drilling in this way, so we want the countersunk side on this side of the panel. What we do at the end of the installation, we put trim all the way across the top of the booth. So what we're going to do is I have a little piece that we just cut out of the stock that we put up there. And we're just going to lay that on top, and then I'm going to lift this T-steel so it's nice and flush with the bottom of the steel. And now I'm just going to screw the steel to the panel. When you go to put these filler panels on, you want to pay special attention to which side of the holes line up to which side of the booth. Depending on the extra space on the panel, some holes will be a little farther apart, some will be a little closer. The panels will be labeled as to say towards booth area, towards filler area. Once you have it lined up correctly, go ahead and just lay the panel into the T-steel there. And it'll just kind of snap in, be nice and smooth. We're just going to use a 1.5 inch carriage bolt. We're going to go right through the panel and right through the steel. And then we're just going to use a regular hex nut to attach it. And we're going to do the same thing all the way down the panel. For this example, we're only building one booth, but to say you were going to do a bunch of booths in a row, you would want to continue the same pattern going down the row. Now, regardless if you're going to do another booth or it's going to be an end panel to cover up the housing, you're going to add one more piece of steel here. Again, you're going to use a 1.5 inch bolt. You're going to put the steel on the corner there, and then you're going to use a regular hex nut, and then just fasten the panel going all the way down. Now we're going to put this panel on. This could be a back wall for the next booth, or it could be an end panel. It's just going to line up right next to the other piece. Now if this is a continuation, we're going to add another piece of booth steel. So again, we're just going to drop it in there. We can go ahead and use an 1.5 inch bolt going into the empty area and just use a regular hex nut. And then we're just going to go down the row and fasten up this piece of steel here. And then if you're doing a continuation of the booths, you're just going to add a side wall, you're going to add the monitor panel, you're going to do the door frame, just the same way as you did the first booth. Just keep doing a row of them, and then when you get to the last row, you're just going to put the finished panel on there, but you won't obviously have the piece of T-steel, and the wood will be finished with a nice piece of T-mold on there for you. Now we're ready to go ahead and put the ceiling in. The ceilings are designed per booth, and you'll notice there's a notch in there. The notch is designed for the occupied and vacant lights, so whenever you put the ceiling in, you just want to make sure this notch is placed right around those two holes. So when you pick this thing up, definitely two people would help. You're just going to lay it on top, And one person's going to walk in the booth, the other one will be on the outside, and you're just going to spin it into place. The ceiling will actually just rest right on top of the steels. Now that we have the ceiling in place, we do need to secure it to the booth, and we're going to do that by screwing 2-inch screws through the 2x2s into the sidewalls just like we did the cleat. And what this is going to do is obviously secure the ceiling, but it's also going to get rid of these gaps that we have around the edges. The easiest way to fasten the ceiling is to basically just put a ladder in the center of the booth, climb right up, and that way we have easy access to the 2x2s. Once you're ready to secure the ceiling, I highly recommend getting a couple of these little quick grips. These are fantastic for holding the sides of the panels together when you screw it in, so everything ends up being nice and flush. What I like to do is start with the monitor panel, fastening the monitor panel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this clamp here on the side, and I'm basically just going to ratchet the 2x2 next to the side panel, and then I'm going to do the same on the front with the door panel. And this way it brings my whole boot together, and I know my monitor panel is centered on the wood. So now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to put one screw in here. I'm going to do it dead center. And again, anytime you're using a wood screw going through a 2x2 into a panel, I recommend backing it out and pushing it back in. So now we have the monitor panel secured to the ceiling. We know it's dead flush, and I'm going to do the same thing on the back end of it, so that way we can take a look underneath, make sure everything's straight before we screw the whole ceiling down. Now that we have the front and back secured, I went down below, I made sure everything's nice and flush, and now it's okay for me to secure the rest of the booth. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the door panel here. I'm going to use a quick grip on the front. So now I know the ceiling is as flush to the door frame as possible, and I'm just going to line this whole piece of wood with the same 2-inch screws. Now we're just going to do the same thing to the back panel. So once you have the sides on and you make sure everything's good underneath, go ahead and throw a few more screws into the front and the back, and your ceiling is secured. Now that we're on top of the booth, this is a good time to go ahead and mount your vacant and occupied lights. Sometimes when you get them, they'll have these little tabs on here. Sometimes we remove them for you, other times you just got to take a pair of wire cutters and cut the little ends off. Now the vacant and occupied can be put in either hole, just depends on your personal preference. Typically we put it on the left side, so your vacant's going to be over here, occupied's going to be over here. And then you have these little nuts that go on the back here, and they just spin on. There is a oversized nut driver in your spare parts kit if you want to use that. It makes attaching these a little easier. So once your buttons are secured, you're going to hook up your lights. This is what's known as an occupied vacant wire. Has a DIN plug on one end, which is going to plug into the booth. And then we have 4 wires on the end. We have a yellow and a red and a black and green. The yellow and the red are going to connect to the light bulb. And they just slip on right here. Doesn't matter which side you hook them on. And then we have another set of wires that's black and green. Just go ahead and connect these in there. And with these, you're just going to push them into the button, and they have a little twist you give them. Push them in, give them a little twist, and they snap in. Push them in, give them a little twist, they snap in. So while you're up here, it's also good to staple the wires down. I recommend leaving a little bit of slack because you're going to be changing the light bulbs from the front. So you just staple the cable down. Since your main electronics are going to be on the right side of the booth, we're just going to drop the cables over here. I don't recommend putting the wires in this area at all because there is going to be a ceiling that we're going to fasten. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to put some expanded metal down. We'll just lay that right on top of the ceiling, just center it over the hole. And then we're going to add a piece of egg crate right on top of it. Same thing, we just want to center it on there. Now to secure this, what we're going to use is a 1 1/4 inch drywall screw with a small washer, and then we're going to use a big washer. You definitely don't want to use a longer screw, otherwise it will pop right through the ceiling and it'll be inside the booth. Now you can just somewhere into the wood here, not too close to the edge of the hole, you just want to secure this straight down. You can do as many as you like. I think about 8 or 10 or 12. Definitely hold the ceiling down in place. Okay, our next step is to install the seat, which we have to install the seat base first, but before we do that, we want to tighten the bottom 2 bolts in the corner of the booth. Now before you do this, you want to take a look at the outside of the booth and make sure the T-steel is lined up with the panels properly. And then all you're going to do is tighten up these nuts here on the door panel side and then on the back panel side, on the front and back part of the booth. Now we need to install the seat base. If you're not using the touch panel mounted in the seat, all you need to do is push the seat base back all the way to the steel, and then we're going to secure it to the wall. If you do have the touch panel, as in this example here, what's going to happen if you have the base all the way back is it's going to interfere with these 2 bolts. So what we need to do is basically just pull it out about a 1/2 inch or so. There's not really an exact science to it. Just make sure these bolts clear it, and that would be a great location. So once you know the base is in a good location, we'll just take the seat top off and we'll secure it to the wall. When you're ready to fasten the seat base, you definitely want to use a 1 5/8 screw, and you want to use a small washer. This is imperative because if the screw goes at all through the seat base, it will pop out through the front. So I'm just going to start in this upper corner and drive it right through everything. I'm just going to repeat this. I'll put 4 screws on each side of the base. Once your seat base is secure, we can go ahead and lay the seat down, and it's just going to lay right in the corner here. You want to make sure it's pushed all the way back, nice and flush. And then all we're going to do is we're going to put 3 screws straight down the middle there. You can use 1 5/8, 2 inch, it doesn't really matter. Some customers silicone the seat base. I don't recommend doing that because if you ever have to change the cushion, you're going to have to cut out all the silicone. To finish off these screw caps, I recommend just using these little tabs. They should be shipped with your system. And just press them over for a nice finished look. Next, we're going to mount the seat back onto the wall. There is no set height for this. We have a standard of about 17 inches off the back. So what we're going to do is we're just going to measure 17 inches up from the seat base here. Put a little line. I'm going to do the same over here. And since we want the seat centered on the base, we're going to measure how far over it is, about 5 3/4. Make another little line right there. Now to mount the seat, you have to pull the hinge apart, and you use a 3/4 inch sheet metal screw. And all we're going to do is we're going to line up this hinge on the red line, make sure they're all lined up nice and straight, and we're going to drive a screw right through the back wall. Now you can also use a level at this point if you like, or you can just go by the lines. You don't really need a lot of screws on this. It's not really supporting any weight. Nobody's really going to steal it, so get away with 3 or 4. Once it flops down, we're going to put 1 more screw on the bottom there just to keep this from happening. If your booth is equipped with an armrest, we're going to go ahead and mount it to the wall here. The height of the armrest, again, it's kind of a personal preference, but we have a set measurement for you that if you want to use that. What we do is we just measure off the seat base here, 10 inches. Just make a little line, scoot to the back here, make another line. And then we're going to fasten this, we call it an armrest support bar. It's going to mount right on the wall here.
and our lines are the top part of this bar. You want to keep it about 2 inches off the back wall. It doesn't have to be exact. Just line it up. Use a 3/4 inch sheet metal screw and fasten it right to the wall. Once the bar is secured, we can go ahead and lay the armrest on there. It has a big cavity on the side here, and basically the bar is just going to lay right on here. Obviously, you want to make sure the wire is out of the way enough so it doesn't get stuck inside the armrest there. It's going to secure itself in place, and then you want to go ahead and slide the armrest back to where it hits the back of the booth steel. Now what we're going to do is we need to open up this lock box. And inside are about 6 more holes. We're going to use the same 3/4 inch sheet metal screw. And if you have a 90-degree drill, this saves a lot of headache. But you're just going to screw the box to the wall. Once you have it secured, you can reach through and pull out that phone cord. And this is going to connect right to the bottom of the touch panel here. And that's all you ever need to do in this box here. So you can just close it, lock it up, and you're ready to go. Okay, now we want to connect the phone cord to this touchpad here. And basically all you're going to do is unlock the door, and then reach inside for that phone cord that we have, and then you plug it in to the bottom of the touch panel. So now we're going to go ahead and put the floor strip on. It just lays right on here, center it in the doorway, and drive some screws in. Now we need to build the shelf for the TVs and the electronics. This panel is labeled as TV support. It just needs to be centered on this panel. You can push it through the window, it fits in there no problem. And you're just going to use a couple screws just to secure it to the back wall. You're going to want to use 1 1/4 inch drywall screws. That way you won't pop all the way through the panel. Now we're going to put the shelf in. One thing I'd like to make a comment about is always make sure you have somebody holding this door for you. It weighs about 80 pounds and you definitely don't want it falling on you. Before you put the shelf in there, you want to make sure all your wires are tucked up on the side and they're not laying on the floor, so that way once you put the shelf in you can still access the cables. The shelf's a little tricky to get in the doorway, but it definitely fits. And it's going to rest on the back wall and on the front cleat. Once they're in place, you're just going to take some 1 5/8 or 2-inch screws, make sure it's flush against the back wall, and drive it right down to the support. Once you have the back screwed in, you want to make sure it's nice and flush to the front, and go ahead and drive a couple screws to the front right through the cleat. Now we're going to go ahead and mount a power strip. You can pretty much put this anywhere you want. In this booth specifically, I'm just going to put it right here. We want to mount it in these little tabs here. I know sometimes they're a little difficult to line up, so I usually just line up the drill so it hits the thick part where the head's actually going to go. Put it down to the panel. And then you want to do the same thing on the other side, except you want to just kind of move it over about 1 inch. And then hopefully, if all goes well, you just line it up and it locks in place. Now we're ready to connect some of the wires to the back of the electronics. This is our standard STB. We have all our various connections that we need here. We can start with the Cat5 and BNC cable that comes from your main server. The Cat5 is going to connect right here. We have the quad in, which is the BNC that comes with the cable. Now we're going to look at all the cables that we had tied over to the side. We had one of our phone cords for the touch panel and the armrest. We have the 36 pin, which supplies our speaker and our bill trigger. We have the 5-pin DIN cable that was connected to our occupied vacant lights. And now we have a video wire. Sometimes the type of TV you purchase might have a different connector, but typically it's an RCA. So this is our video to our main TV. That's going to plug in right here. And that's going to go to our big TV. Now we have our quad wire. The BNC is going to connect to the back here. And this side will eventually connect to the quad TV. We have another wire that we need to connect, which is the alarm. And this plugs into the far side over here. Then the last cable we have is just a power cord. Now before you turn it on, or before you plug in the power cord, I do recommend that you have the power strip off. The power cord actually plugs into this small power supply here. So just plug the cord in there. Go ahead and plug the power cord into the power strip. And then this power supply, you can kind of lay it on the side or lay it on the top, whatever you like. The power connection into the box is on the far corner over on the side here. Now if you have a quad system, we're going to put this little shelf over here, and this is going to hold your quad TV, and we could just slide the electronics and the power supply right inside the box. And it's going to sit right about there, and then we're going to take our quad TV and just set it right on top. So now we're going to put the large TV in, and depending on where the connectors are, sometimes you have to lean the TV on its side. And we're going to plug our video wire to the video in on the back of the TV. And you just want to make sure the cords are clear when you slide the TV back. Just straighten it on the panel, go ahead and plug in the power. So this is the way the front of the housing should look. You have the main TV on the left, you have the quad TV on the right, the electronics underneath. All you need to do at this point is plug in the quad wire into the video in. Sometimes it's jacks on the back, but typically they're on the front on these smaller TVs. Now I'm going to show you how to put the doorknob on. First thing you need to do is separate the two pieces. You'll see a little tab on the top part, the one that has the little plunger on there. You're just going to press in. This part's going to come off, then the little sleeve's going to come off. Now we're going to insert the doorknob from the front. You'll see this little groove here. This needs to line up with the doorknob. So you just slide it in, give it a little bit of a jiggle. You can test it out to make sure you got it in there right by just twisting the doorknob. That way you know you got it hooked on right. And then on the inside, we're going to screw the cover plate on. And you separate the cover plate from the back, like so. And you'll see it labeled top, bottom. So obviously we put the top on there. And then the box comes with 2 screws. We're going to just slowly put the top one in. Go ahead and put the bottom one in before you tighten the top one down. And then just slowly tighten it up. You don't want to over crank it, otherwise it's going to be really hard to open the doorknob. Just look on the front, make sure it's flush, make sure it's turns. Now we're going to put the cover plate back on. And this is a small little notch here, and you see a little wire bracket on the bottom here. And that's just going to snap right on there. And now this last piece goes on, and you're just going to line up the notch with the notch. And again, you have to just push this little tab in. Doorknob pops on. You're ready to go. Now that you have the booth walls up and the ceilings in, you can go ahead and tighten the bolts at will. The only ones you have to kind of watch out for are the ones on the front door. Because of the panels might be twisted a little bit because your floor is a little off. You just want to make sure that your T-steel is flush on both sides of the wood before you tighten the bolts on the front of the booth and the side of the booth. Sometimes you have to kind of push and pull the panels a little bit
to get them tight and make it nice and smooth, but it'll definitely finish off the booth real nice. One of the final touches you're going to do to your booth is put some trim across the top. You might notice between certain panels, this area right here, one might be higher, one might be lower, so the trim definitely covers that up. Sometimes it's a bit extreme because your floor could be a little off and you might want to saw it down with a jigsaw first. But the trim is real simple. You just line it up to the edge of the booth and you can just use regular nails and just drive in, 2 to 3 every booth. When we ship you the trim, it comes in bulk stock, so it's various lengths and you do have to customize it to your booth job. Obviously, you're just going to cut it to size. Sometimes on the corners you want to do 45s, but the trim is a nice little addition and really finishes off the booth well. One of the last things you're going to do to your booth is silicone it, and my best advice to you on this is just kind of take your time. It's very important that the booth be completely sealed and make sure no liquids can get in there. Most silicone guns have a cutter on the side here, so you're just going to chop the end off. You want a nice small hole there so it comes out nice and slow. There's also a poker on the front of these things, so you just pop it through there. Go ahead and load the silicone, and now you're just going to start in the corner. You just want to take your time, go nice and slow, and do a real nice small bead of silicone. Just take your time. Go all the way across one wall at a time. Once you make one nice even bead across the whole panel, you want to just take your finger, just push in the corner, put a little pressure on it. This pushes the silicone into the corner. Make sure everything gets sealed up real nice and neat. And just run it all the way down the panel.